Well, all right. I think we'll get things started. Well, welcome everyone for joining us for another Rhone Rangers virtual experience. We hope you all are safe and well now. My name is Tony Quayle. I'm the general manager here at Thatcher Winery in Paso Robles, California, but also the president of the Rhone Rangers organization. Today, you are joining us for a virtual discussion on rosé, and with this current little heat wave we're having, perfect timing. I want to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Lamar Engel. Lamar is the founder and experience director for a wine experience and marketing company called Wine Militia. With a background in rock and roll music and touring, Lamar initially found a passion and love for wine in 1999, working in restaurants, wineries in the Bay Area. Since 2008, Lamar has led his team of wine professionals and sommeliers in producing unique wine events and experiences for the public and private clients, including corporate companies throughout the country. Welcome, Lamar.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it, and thank you, Kim, and all of the Rhone Rangers. Really appreciate this opportunity. I was hoping for this chance to come sooner because it's getting warmer out. And I don't know about you, but anything that has to do with the refreshing beverage, such as rosé, just seems like such a honey conversation that I need to have. It couldn't be here soon enough. So I'm excited. I'm joined by some amazing individuals, and I just want to thank you all for carving out some time today on this busy Thursday to chat about something that is delicious and mouthwatering as rosé. And I have with me none other than Randall Grahm of Bonny Doon Vineyards. We also have Charles McKahn of McKahn Vineyards as well. And we have Kale Anderson of Kale Wines. And we also have Brian Woodstrand of Steinbeck Vineyards. I'm very excited to get in deep with you guys, talk a little bit about rosé. We do have 4 different rosés here that are lined up to try, and stylistically, just off the first sniff, they're all very different. So I don't know about you, if you're watching at home and you're able to have some of these in the near future, or if you have them handy, this is going to be definitely a study of rosé, not just in shades of color, but also styles and textures and mouthfeel, whole thing. So I think without further ado, we should dive in. And I think to start off our conversation, I think it's only poignant to begin with our friend Randall Grahm, Bonny Doon Vineyards. Randall, thanks for joining us today, and thanks for sharing this amazing little rosé that we're going to chat about. How are you doing today?
Overheated. Thank you very much. Also, my computer tells me my connection is unstable. I knew that I was unstable. To begin with, I don't need a computer to tell me, Zoom to tell me that. But anyways, I apologize if anything gets a little freaky or erratic, or more erratic than normal.
No, you look great, and unstable is why we're all here, I think, because this is something that is a consistent part in our life, and that is the beverage that we know of as wine. So so I love your rosé. I wanted to chat a little bit about a couple things with you specifically about your rosé, and this is the Vineyard de Cigare. And I just want to ask you kind of where the inception of this began, and give us just a little background on the inspiration behind this.
Well, to be perfectly honest, we've been making this wine in one form or another since 1981, if you can believe that, which is pretty incredible. It started out as a Mourvedre rosé. I don't even remember why we ended up making Mourvedre rosé, but we did. And frankly, I made it for all the wrong reasons. It was originally essentially a byproduct of red wine production. It was a vin de saignée in large part, not completely, but in large part a vin de saignée. And the reason I called it Vin Gris is Vin Gris sounded better than Vin Rosé de Cigare. It had one fewer syllable, so it scanned better poetically. But it wasn't truthful because it wasn't really Vin Gris. Now, after I sold Big House, I sort of made this internal commitment to be 100% transparent in everything we did. We initiated ingredient labeling at that point. And I thought, well, if we're going to be honest and transparent with ingredient labeling, we need to actually make wines that are conform to what we call them. So if it's called Vin Gris, either it needs to be Vin Gris for God's sake. So I made a stylistic change, and we actually, at that point on, this is now about 15 years ago, made the wine as a proper Vin Gris, which is to say harvested grapes at the appropriate maturity for a pink wine, So we didn't have to go to the same manipulations to make it balanced. We didn't have to add acid, or only occasionally to some Mourvedre. Didn't have to water it down with water. And also just change stylistically. Again, prior to that, I was very concerned. I wanted the color to be very vivid, and I wanted the fragrance to be overwhelming. So I actually kind of took the wine in a stylistically different direction by either using indigenous yeast, which we've done for many years, or if we don't have our stuff together to use indigenous yeast, neutral yeast, to avoid the idea of these kind of artificial fruit flavors. I don't want the wine to smell like Jolly Ranchers, or I don't want it candied. I want more floral qualities than overtly fruity or candied character. So the other thing we did with this wine is we do a lot of batonnage post fermentation. Maybe the 2020 we may have taken it to slightly extreme. It's very textural in virtue of the batonnage. I wonder perhaps we may have overdone it just a weensy bit, but live and learn.
I love it. This is a composition of quite a few personalities in the Rhone category, and I looked at some past vintages of your Vineyard to Cigare, and I honestly noticed that there was one specific change that took place, I think in 2018, and that was a little bit more Grenache in the more current vintages. Are you able to kind of just talk to us a little bit about the Grenache and stylistically kind of what that looks like, and then maybe the composition? Tell us a little bit about.
Well, there's Grenache because there's lots of Grenache out there, to be totally candid. In a perfect world, I would be making this wine 100% from Tibournin.
Wow.
But I don't live in a perfect world yet. So Grenache is what's on the menu. I like, in the past, we've used more Mourvedre and Carignan. I like the contribution of Mourvedre and Carignan just to give a little more weight on the palate and more grip on the palate. You want to not overdo it. A lot of Mourvedre in a pink wine will make the wine somewhat astringent, which is not necessarily a bad thing unless you're trying to sell it the same vintage. So Mourvedre rosés or Mourvedre pink wines will have more longevity, but there'll also be a lot more foreboding when they're young.
Wow.
So I mean, Grenache, coastal Grenache is lovely. It comes in with good natural acidity. We like it because we don't have to manipulate it. And when you don't have to manipulate a wine, the wine is more seamless and just more naturalistic, if you will.
Love it. So in this composition, we have Grenache, we have Cinsaut, we have Clairette Blanche, we have Grenache Blanc, and then we also have Mourvedre and Vermentino.
There's also Grenache Gris not credited.
Okay, yeah, like a small percentage.
Well, it's actually not. It's a relatively small percentage, but the TTB doesn't quite believe that it exists just yet. So it's traveling under a nom de guerre.
Oh, interesting. Okay, this will be something of a future conversation we're gonna have about that, because I think that's the fascinating part about the composition and how you approach this. I think this is kind of the one question that a lot of people want to ask is, you have all of these first strings, if you will, in the blending composition of rosé. How do you approach? Obviously, you start with the Grenache that you love, and there is a lot of, but how do you then kind of play soloist and dualist with some of these varieties?
Well, to be perfectly honest, the Vin Gris composition is not finessed to, not like the Cigare. The red wines are finessed to a much greater degree, where 1% or 2% really seems to matter. With pink wine, everything matters, of course, but at a certain point, you can drive yourself crazy with neurosis. So we know the vineyards reasonably well. We've had a history with them. We know it's going to make a balanced wine. It's a tried and true recipe. I'm not writing monographs on the subject at this point. Not on this particular wine.
Nice, I love it. Now, there's definitely something to be said about texture on this as well. So I think that, especially for those that are tuning in, I think if you're wondering what it feels like, there's a lot of composition, a lot of texture, from silkiness to a little bit of. There's a little rustic quality too that is definitely kind of fun about this, but it is definitely definitely checks all the boxes for everything that I would expect in a rosé from you, Randall. So I appreciate it. This is amazing. I'm a big fan. I've always loved your rosé program, and obviously loved your reserve Cigare Blanc program. Tell us a little bit about the impetus. I know for those that are really just tuning in for the first time and talking about Bonny Doon specifically, but the label itself, I know that there's a little bit of an ode to a story here that I think it kind of beckons to be told. So give us a little bit of background on that.
You know, I've only had to tell the story twice today, so this is only the third time. So I'm getting off easy today.
Okay.
So when I first made Cigare Volant back in '84, I wanted to give the world a point of reference. What the heck we were talking about? What is this wine all about? And I wanted to, in a sense, contextualize the wine with some sort of oblique mention of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. But the problem is, whenever you try to come off as being a copy of a French wine, you seem pretentious and stupid and ridiculous, in fact. So I wanted to do this, but in a kind of ironic, semi-cool, ironic way. So instead of calling the wine Chateau quelque chose or Domaine de n'importe quoi, it was called Cigare Volant. And then people say, well, why are you calling it Cigare Volant? And let me tell you why I'm calling it Cigare Volant, because it has to do with this goofy bit of legislation adopted in 1954 in one of the villages of Châteauneuf, whereby the mayor was concerned that UFOs were going to land in the vineyard, because there were a lot of sightings of UFOs in that neighborhood. And of course, none have landed, but this is an interesting story, and it disarms people, and it's memorable, and it's an opportunity to make a slightly subversive label.
Well, you've definitely created some impactful memory there for me anyways, as you know, like I said, the reserve program and then the rosé program, I iconically remember the cigar being associated with your wines. And I think it's something to be said about wines in general. It's hard to have an impactful brand message sometimes without some imagery. And I'm a kid of, like, I love swag too. So if I can sport swag on my hydro flask, I will. So it's kind of a thing. So you know, this comes from the old punk rock days. You go up to the old merch table and you buy swag, and then you show off your swag. So I'm in. If it's about an alien popping up in my Zoom background, I will show it, and I respect that. No, but honestly, this is a serious wine for those that really enjoy, you know, refreshing rosés that are made with good intent, and, you know, definitely transparency. I love the vineyard, all the different vineyard designates that you have into the Central Coast AVA. It's a lot of work there, I'm sure. So thank you for sharing this. I have one last question for you as we kind of walk through some of these other wines and talk to some of our friends here. Was there a particular rosé for you specifically in your career that kind of piqued your interest into creating the rosé program?
Well, historically, of course, it was Tempier.
Sure.
It is for many people.
Oh
More recently, maybe in the last 10 or 12 years, it's been Clos Sibonne, which is kind of really getting me going.
For sure.
But there's great rosés out of Chateau Simon, Lopez de Heredia. And what's so cool about it is that they're all made in totally different styles. There is not one style of rosé that works, that makes genius wine. So I love the fact that there is a diversity of styles. And if life is long enough, I would love to try making pink wines in many diverse different styles.
Love it. I love that you mentioned, you know, Domaine Tempier and Lulu Perot and her passing last year, and a great icon for that particular chateau. So I appreciate that, and that is definitely one to dog ear historically for something to set an example, impactful example. So thank you for sharing that. That's huge. I'm excited. These are amazing wines. I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store when it comes to rosé here. So we've, you know, having your first rosé be the Bonny Doon Vineyard Rosé. And if you guys are wondering, again, this is the label here that we're showing. It's the 2020 vintage that we had here. Again, it's 71% Grenache. It has Cinsaut, Clairette Blanche, Grenache Blanc. We also have a little bit of Mourvedre and Vermentino in there. We're gonna talk a little bit to our friend Charles from McKahn Vineyards, or McKahn Family Cellars. So I'm excited to chat with Charles a little bit, or Chuck rather. Sorry, Chuck. I always say Charles. Sorry about that.
Charles on my birth certificate.
Or if you're in trouble, maybe, yeah.
Or if I'm in trouble. Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm excited. Like I said earlier when we were chatting, I have never had your wines, and I've been looking forward to today. And honestly, I would love to hear a little bit more about McKahn Family Cellars and about kind of your past here with the Rosé program. Love to hear about that.
Yeah, so McKahn Family Cellars, we at the time there were only 3 of us McKahns. My girlfriend at the time, Brittany, we were now married, so there are now 4 McKahns. But we started making wine together in 2014 when I was just an enologist at Chapelet, up here in Napa Valley. And at a really young age, my parents just noticed how serious I was about making wine and that I wasn't going to run off and do something else. So they wanted to invest in me and invest in their only child. So yeah, we've been making wine since 2014, but we've been making only Rhones since 2016. So I went to college at Cal Poly, Rhone country, and I always preferred Rhones to drink. I moved up to Napa Valley so that I had a better shot at working for a really good winemaker, because there are just so many here. There are really good winemakers all over the world, but in California, there is just a higher concentration here. So I didn't really think about the varietal landscape when I moved up here. And in 16, after 2 vintages of making wine, I was kind of just, we made a Zinfandel, a Syrah, and a Chardonnay. I knew I always loved Syrah, but again, my girlfriend, my wife now, she was like, you don't seem too passionate about your wines. And I said, I kind of would like to make Rhones for some reason. I'll tell you, still to this day, I don't know enough about them. I wish I knew more, and it's a constant learning experience. But yeah, so we've been Rhones only since 16. That was our first vintage of Rosé. This Rosé is from a vineyard owned by Jeff Runquist up in just outside of Plymouth in Shenandoah, Amador County.
Cool.
And my first harvest, I was 3 months out of high school. So 2007 was at some family friends, McManus family vineyards in my hometown of Ripon. And Jeff was the founding winemaker there. And, 9 years later, I was looking for some Sierra Foothills Grenache. I hadn't talked to him in a long time. So I gave him a call, and he was like, I'm an escrow on a property, a quarter mile from the winery, and it's got Grenache on it that I don't need. So for the first handful of years, we made a red and a rosé out of it. There was a definite riper end of the vineyard, so we would save that for the red, and we would make sort of the lesser ripe stuff for the rosé. And in 2020, the one that we're drinking now, I had always preferred the rosé over the red. So in 2020, I just decided to make the whole vineyard rosé. So
wow.
Yeah, so we upped production. It was a gamble, but a gamble that's paying off, and I'm pretty happy with the wine.
I love it. We also have some other folks that feel the same way. We have Stacy who just mentioned that you're making a great rosé, lovely and delicious. And honestly, I was taken back by it's highly energetic. It's got a ton of minerality. I'm more curious now about the production that went into this. Is it all stainless steel? Is there a little bit of oak in this? Talk to me. Is this whole cluster? Like, let's geek out a little bit.
Yeah. So between a couple of brands, I've made a couple of rosés, and I've never made a rosé the same way twice. I'm kind of figuring out how I like it, what works for me, what doesn't work for me. So this particular vintage of 2020, it's a whole cluster. The Grenache on this vineyard is I believe it's an Albin clone. I'm not 100% sure. Jeff's not 100% sure, but it's a pretty big cluster, thin skin. really juicy. So there's no point in destemming it. So I throw it in the press hole, press it up. It's very juicy and makes a really nice wine whole cluster. This wine that is different from years past is that this was 100% tank fermented.
Wow,
and when it was done with fermentation, I aged it in 60% neutral oak,
okay.
and 40% stainless steel tank. And then I wanted to experiment with a really short aging. I'm not a organic chemist or anything, but I have this inclination that color without tannin is sort of a easily oxidized kind of phenol or molecule.
Yeah.
And I decided to do a really short aging just to keep as little oxygen off the wine as possible. So we actually bottled it in December. It was only a 3-month aging.
Okay. Wow.
And
Nice.
I'm not 100% confident I'm going to do that again. I'm kind of 60-40 on that right now, but I could have used maybe a little more lees contact on the wine, but that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it.
I love it. You're talking about the experimentation side of it. There's a little bit of playful aspect to it. I love that freedom that you're able to give yourself here. Obviously, there's costs associated with wine, and I feel like the rosé programs in a lot of wineries give kind of some room to play. Do you see yourself down the road playing with other varietals for rosé? I mean, specifically maybe Syrah, or more, do you want to stay with Grenache? Talk to me a little bit about down the road, what it looks like for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an open book. I mean, there's a lot of options when it comes to what wines or what varieties can go into rosé. Sure. I haven't made this much before, so seeing that it's doing well, and not wanting to change it up too much, I'd be a little hesitant to try a new variety. But there are a million different varieties that go into rosé, so trying to stick with maybe some of the more common ones, Mourvedre, Cinsaut, Quinoise, things like that. I mean, it's all about what's available to me in a given location in a given year.
Love it. And if you're just tuning in, we're tasting the McKahn family Cellars Rosé of Grenache. This is the 2020. And let me bring this over here so you guys can see. This is from the Shenandoah Valley, Amador. So we're looking at some amazing elevation, some incredible minerality on this, and some zippiness. I love that. Great job, Charles. Talk to me a little bit about, since we're kind of geeking out, let's keep the train rolling. Have there been any kind of concerns during vintage to vintage, specifically for Grenache? Obviously, Grenache is prone to some things in the vineyard that, as opposed to other varieties. Have you approached it the same way? Is there something that really kind of, you have to red flag every year for you, and you get up 3 a.m. and think about?
No, I mean, I have enough to worry about with, all different kinds of weather issues these days, but no, not really. It's for rosé in particular, I pick it at a really low Brix compared to all of my other wines. It's 20.5 to 21.5 at the very top end of the Brix scale. And it's just a very forgiving, at least in my experience. Like I said, I'm not a Rhone expert, and I haven't worked with a ton of Rhone vineyards, but it's a pretty forgiving vineyard, a very forgiving variety. It gets really hot up there, and you can get these big heat spikes that may or may not ruin a vineyard here, depending on the variety. And I'm in Napa right now. We don't see that kind of dramatic shift in anything with that particular Grenache vineyard. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's just a really easy, fun vineyard to work with.
Yeah, I love that. And you talked about Jeff Runquist. Are there any collaborations in the future potentially with Mr. Runquist and maybe in a rosé fashion? Who knows?
You mean from a winemaking perspective, or buying more grapes from him? Jeff's got a pretty buttoned up operation over there. He's making a ton of wine now. When I was working for him 14 years ago, he was making, less than 10,000 cases, I think. And now he's probably 25 or 30. He's got his own winery, has his own staff. A former high school classmate of mine is now his winemaker, kind of helping him run the show. So kind of try to stay out of Jeff's way. I'm just I'm thankful to get the grapes, and I'm glad that he doesn't need them at this point. And he gets his Grenache. I think it's down in Paso Robles, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So I'm just fortunate to be working with him and his vineyard manager, Pat Rohan. So.
Oh, cool. Love it. Great expression on the rosé program here. I'm excited to taste this again. And, this is something that I'm definitely going to try throughout the night. So all of these are, by the way, there's no favorites yet. But I will tell you that it's going to be a happy night. This is amazing. I love the vivaciousness and the energy in this rosé. So thanks, Charles, for sharing this with us.
Thank you.
And we'll get to some more questions here in a little bit. A lot of people are really enjoying kind of on the chat here. Jim says he's a Cal Poly proud as well. Cal Poly proud. So great. He's great to see you. And he's going to try your wine soon. And we have some other folks that are really excited about how we're approaching these wines. So let's keep going here. So I think it's time we talk to Mr. Kale Anderson of Kale Wines. Kale, how are you?
Great. How you doing, Lamar?
Good. You're relaxed there. You got all 4 wines. You see kind of the lineup that we're doing here, and I'm excited. Any thoughts as to these last two wines, just for fun, candidly?
Oh, yeah. Both of these wines are great. I mean, it's 105 degrees outside. I would gladly use any of these as a porch pounder.
Absolutely. So we're talking with Kale Anderson of Kale Wines, and if you have never tasted any wines from Kale, definitely this is the service commercial here, but definitely recommend it. Kale, I'm excited to chat with you about your rosé. We're going to talk a little bit of a different region here, I'm sure. So talk to us a little bit about kind of your background and about this rosé program. Let's jump in.
So let me see. So let me start from the beginning, I guess. So the first year that I made rosé was in 2009, and kind of like Randall, it was basically a Saignée project where I was bleeding juice off of red fermentations, basically with the idea to concentrate my red wines. So it was almost like a byproduct, and it would, I can't stand to throw anything away. I'm a bit of a hoarder. So I was like, okay, like, let's make some rosé out of it. And the first year in 2009, it was terrible. And I think it was because I added my acid way too late anyways. But I've always loved the wines of Provence. I've always loved rosé to be rosé. So I knew I wanted to do it with a little bit more respect, and with with a clear vision of exactly the wine that I wanted to make. It was funny, back in 2009, I mean, it was right after the Great Recession. We only made a barrel of the Saignée rosé. We called it the Pink Slip, and we didn't sell that commercially. We didn't think it was appropriate. After thinking better of it, after putting the label on it, but that never went commercial. But in 2011 was the year that I was able to convince a grower in Rutherford in the Napa Valley to actually plant Grenache.
That's a miracle.
Randall's saying head blown. So I mean, I make a lot of big Cabernets in Napa, make Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, etc. But I was approached by the McGah family in 2011 saying, like, hey, this is when I was at Cliff Lady Vineyards, and he was like, or they were like, hey, what do you want me to plant? Whatever you want to plant, let me know, because we want to grow stuff that you want to buy. So then I was like, oh, really? Why don't you plant Grenache and Mourvedre? And they were like, I take that back. I take that back. I'm not sure, we'll plant anything but that.
Right.
So anyways, but we continued the conversation. They're open-minded people, and or crazy. And I convinced them through a 10-year pre-plant contract. So basically telling them that I would buy the fruit from them for 10 years if they planted what I asked them
Wow.
to. And the way that we make it work is that we basically harvest the vineyard twice. So we harvest, around 20 bricks right after, kind of right after green drop, basically right after veraison for the rosé, which then, concentrates the red, and then we'll go back through the same rows, the same vineyard, harvest it for red. And the red is a lot more concentrated and intense and ripe and whatnot to make the red wine. So you do all those things, then, the economics make a little bit more sense, but, not complete sense.
Yeah, right. This is interesting to me because obviously, Rutherford known for Cabernet, and that's where the money has been historically for growers. I love that trust story. That's like a huge trust factor, which is a testament, obviously, of your work ethic too, and kind of your name there. But talk to me a little bit about what that looks like. The Mourvedre, the Grenache. Does it pick up that same kind of Rutherford red dust that we think of in the Cabernet of that region? Does it act the same in that aspect, or what does it look
dusty.
like?
It is dusty, and
Really?
it's dusty, and I think through the other varieties that's grown there, like it's true Rutherford bench, so it's on the east side of the valley, so just off of the Silverado Trail off of Ponte Lane.
Okay.
It's planted right next to Beckstoffer George III vineyard. So we like to say we're growing Grenache and Mourvedre in Beckstofferville, and just try to blow people's minds a little bit. But yeah, it's beautiful soil. It's red. It's dusty. It's well drained. It's hot. It's pretty intense over there. But the soils are fertile enough that we can get a decent crop of rosé and a decent crop of red. Those vines are strong. I mean, we have Alban clone Grenache and heritage clone of Mourvedre. Honestly, I don't know what it is. I have 6 rows, and one of the rows is Mourvedre, and the rest are Grenache. So it ends up being about 85%, 84% Grenache, and then the rest Mourvedre, because we press it all together. So, so yeah, it's a great project, and we can usually get 2 tons to the acre of the rosé, and still get 4 tons to the acre of red out of Rutherford. So we would naturally be doing a green drop, and
Sure.
and cutting back the crop anyways to try to concentrate for the the quality for the red anyhow. So this is kind of a way to use all parts of the pig.
This is awesome. I had no idea that it would take on some of that Rutherford quality that we look for in some of the other reds. So that's fascinating. I love that you're using, it says in the back of this label that it's 84% Grenache, 16% Mourvedre, and then there's a little indication that there's concrete egg usage here. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of the impetus behind that?
Yeah. So back in 2005, the only way to get a concrete egg in California was to buy the non-blow concrete eggs, which are imported from France. We were using a lot of those for the Cliff Lady Sauvignon Blanc at the time. But then a guy named Steve Rosenblatt reached out, who owns a company called Sonoma Cast Stone. Yep. And he brought on, a couple of winemakers, Pax, Maley, myself, a few others. I think Jeff Cohn was there for a bit. And he specialized in making, concrete bars, concrete soaking tubs, concrete floors and stuff like this. He's in Petaluma, and he's got a big, huge workshop there. So he was like, "Hey, winemakers, I think I want to go into the wine business. I hear you guys like use concrete, you know, for your tanks, and you know, what would you want? Why would you want it? So, you know, he came up with 3 ideas about what we wanted. You know, at the time, you know, in 2005, I hadn't started my brand yet. I was an assistant winemaker at Cliff Lake. There's no way I could afford one. So I told Steve when he got a good used one available, let me know. Guy named Jeff Hill went out of business, and he owed a bunch of money on an egg that he repossessed. And he was like, "Hey, Kale, you want it? You know, just pay me off for the remainder of the of what's owed." So I was like, "All right, well, now I got a concrete egg. Now I got a huevo." So then I was like, "Okay, like let's make rosé in it." So you know, I made a few vintages of rosé before that. You know, before I got a hold of that egg, but yeah, it's all made in concrete, a Sonoma cast on concrete egg. It's all, you know, temperature controlled and all the fancy pants stuff. And yeah, you know, I think that it does a good job of kind of softening the acidity, because, you know, all that natural acidity, when we get it, you know, at 19 bricks, 20 bricks, it's kind of nice to kind of soften it, give it, you know, without using barrel.
For sure. And that was something I was going to ask you about the weight of this. There's a little bit of viscosity, but there's some roundness here to it that is really pleasurable. So I love that. It leads me to another question I'm going to ask later on to everyone, but I love that this is the roundness, and I had to ask about the egg because I wasn't sure. That's fascinating. I didn't know that. I didn't know that is something that does. It kind of softens it a bit. That's really cool. I'm a big fan of your wines. Believe it or not, we have a fellow colleague by the name of Craig Becker who had poured
awesome. Yeah,
one of your first wines for me when I was working for Craig. And I was like, who is this guy? So I was kind of blown out of my mind. I didn't realize you were at Cliff Lady, and then we found out. And anyway, so we've been fans of your wines, and we know that you've got your thumbprint on kind of the new and I hate using the word trendy, but kind of the really relevant things that are going on in Napa. So I appreciate that. I love that you're switching the dialogue and the narrative a little bit with some Rhone and Napa. This leads to ask the question, Kale, is this the future of Napa potentially? I mean, could we see a little bit of a diurnal swing on the varietals?
Oh yeah. One egg at a time, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you know, Napa grows a lot of great things. You know, they grow, you know, world famous pumpkins. You know, I think, you know, Cabernet has been, you know, planted very widely, you know, more because of marketing purposes. But, you know, I think there is an openness to do things other than Cabernet, or, you know, the things that, you know, the biggest cash crops. So, you know, just, you know, try to make cool things, you know, one step at a time, and, you know, try to educate ourselves along the way. I mean, you know, Grenache is, you know, I would say the most drought tolerant variety, you know, that we haven't got to through hybridization yet, Randall. So, you know, there might be a future. There might be a future. You know, cult Grenache in Napa, right?
I love that you asked Randall that. Randall, can I put you on the spot? And if you want to talk to us a little bit about that, what do you think about that? You know, Grenache and Napa. Have you ever seen the day coming? I mean, this has got to be.
You know, I don't know that Napa is really the right spot for Grenache. The only reason I say that is that the valleys are maybe a little too fertile for Grenache. Grenache is prodigious, will just produce like crazy. It really needs a super poor soil. Sandy soil is good, or rocky soil. I just, a lot of the, there's a lot of clay and loam in the Napa soil. So and the other thing, of course, is the real estate is just out of control.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think some days other grapes will supplant Cabernet. My money's on Sagrantino and Aglianico.
Aglianico for sure, 1,000%. I agree. Although Kale, you might be flipping the dialogue a little bit, doing that Mourvedre thing here. I think might be kind of a fun little game changer, and you might have found a little niche pocket in Rutherford that I think was kind of a crazy thing. So I'm excited. Randall kind of weighed in on the jury. I'm excited to see kind of what happens in the near future. Alianico, if it happens, we owe Randall $5 for that. So I love it. I love it. This is good. Thanks for sharing these wines, Kale. I appreciate it. And there's something that just like calls me back to this wine. So I'm going to come back to it in a sec. I love it. It's amazing. But thank you so much for sharing. We're not done yet. We're going to continue to chat a little bit. And if you're just tuning in, we are chatting with the Rhone Rangers here. We have Randall Grahm, we have Charles McKahn, we also have Kale Anderson. Now we're going to talk with Brian Woodstrand from none other than Steinbeck Vineyards and Wineries. Steinbeck's had quite a history. I mean, I think out of all of us here, I think probably one of the most withstanding histories in that area. Brian, thanks for being here, and talk to us a little bit about your winery and about this rosé program that we have going on.
Well, thanks for having me on. And yeah, you're right about longevity of the Steinbeck family in this area. The Geneseo district is the sub-AVA, which our vineyard is located in the middle of. And it's actually named after our family's original settlement in this area as farmers in 1884. And then this current property we live on and we farm was purchased in 1921. So this year is actually 100 years on one property.
Wow.
Now, there's a photo of Howie Steinbeck when he converted this property from barley and cattle over to vineyard in 1982. The photo is of his grandfather, Frank, who bought the property in 1921, driving the tractor with a 1,000-gallon water tank on the back, and Howie was filling a gallon jug from the water tank and hand watering each of his Cabernet Sauvignon vines that he had planted. And the Wine History Society of San Luis Obispo found that photo and contacted us and said, do you know this makes you the oldest continuous winemaking family in the county? And of course, Grandpa says, I don't care, you know, whatever. Yeah. So yeah, there's a long history. Actually, the room that I'm sitting in right now, this is a 1921 built blacksmith shop that Howie Steinbeck's grandfather built. And Cindy, his daughter, my mother-in-law, converted it to a museum. And so now all of the artifacts in this room, everywhere behind me, are from this property, from this family, minus the saxophone over in the back corner over there. We had to buy an extra one because the real one was over in New York. And so, yeah, so there's a huge family history here.
Wow, I love that. I love the attention to the historical story. The blacksmith shop that's now been converted. That's great. That itself is an attraction to see. I think the more that our generations come up, they need to see more of kind of where we've come from, in my opinion. I'm a huge proponent of storytelling, and obviously your winery has a lot of opportunity for storytelling. You know, obviously fifth generation, it sounds like Cindy's like fifth generation. Is there a future for the sixth and seventh generation to take over the business, or is this maybe something that you guys are thinking about?
So Cindy's son, my brother-in-law, Ryan, is the vineyard manager, and he has been working with his grandfather managing the vineyard since he was like 14 years old. And he's now in charge of vineyard operations. So he manages 420 acres here on Steinbeck Estate, 99% of which he sells to other wineries in the area and then also up in Napa. And then he manages another 500 acres in the Paso Robles area, including some dry farmed area on the west side, Crode Vineyards. And of course, he manages Eberly Vineyards, which has been a long time partnership with the Steinbecks. Howie actually managed Gary's Estrella Vineyard in the 70s, 80s. And that's actually where the Syrah was transplanting. We took cuttings from that Estrella Vineyard and planted them in the middle of our vineyard. And so our phase 4, so that was the 4th planting here, was cuttings from that Syrah. So it's not super old as far as vines go in California or the world, but it is either the 2nd oldest or the oldest planted commercial Syrah in the United States.
Wow, I didn't know that. So talk to me about the grapes that are going into the Rosetta here. You mentioned Syrah. Is this mostly Syrah then, or?
By palate weight, I would say yes.
Yeah.
But by blend, it's actually 2/3 Grenache.
Wow.
And like Randall was talking about poor soils and Grenache, it's right on the north-facing slope off of our west edge of our property in sandier soils. And so the Grenache there we pick entirely for rosé. And then the Syrah component was going to be maybe a 50-50 blend, but looking at the composition by palette in a blend, the Syrah is so powerful that blending it 1/3 Syrah actually looks more like 2/3 Syrah and 1/3 Grenache. And so we didn't want to overpower the Grenache varietal by blending it more with the Syrah. And we also didn't want it to taste like meat. And the Estrella clone happens to be a very savory clone of Syrah. And we really wanted to maintain the essence of rosé, which is to say it tastes like something that's pink and not necessarily like beef jerky. And so we blended it to the point where we have a huge amount of texture, and that's what the Syrah component gives you. And also because those vines are a little older and the roots are down a little farther, there's a mineral component to the wine that you can only get with older vines, I think. That you're actually tasting what the soil tastes like when it's windy here in the autumn. And so, yeah, we were looking for a balance of watermelon, strawberry, and then the Syrah component also adds, besides that texture, some mandarin, and then also some maybe a little bit of grapefruit from the Grenache as well.
Yeah, there's some beautiful weight here. Again, there's a little bit of a floral component too, which is kind of giving a nod to the elegance, but there is a power component for sure that I love about this rosé. That's gorgeous. I love the conversation about the Eberle, the tie-in, the partnership there. But obviously, Randall, when we talk about Gary Eberle bringing in the suitcase clone, you come to mind too. And I have to ask selfishly, what are your thoughts when you hear about this older style of winemaking and then the vineyard?
I have a lot of acquaintance with the Eberle vineyard. I first bought Syrah in 1983 from Estrella River, way back when. There were things that were not very well known about Syrah back in the day. Like you couldn't really crop it at 7 or 8 tons per acre and make red wine out of it if it was any good. So that was a learning. But I've been fascinated by the Estrella clone of Syrah. I've been following it. And one of my recent missions is to do some genetic study of the Estrella clone, because I think it's very distinct. I think it's the most distinctive of the clones that are available and are primarily available in California. And I have this suspicion that it may well be identical to the so-called Serene clone of Côte Rôtie. That's my guess. But I'm hoping that I can have the wherewithal to do a genetic test and match and see if that hypothesis is correct.
Wow, that's fascinating. That would be incredible if we could trace that back to Serene. That would be amazing. Love that. And Brian, this wine kind of beckons to ask a question of like, do you do another style of Grenache or Grenache or Syrah besides this composition in a rosé? I have to know.
So when this is back in 2017, Ryan Newkirk, who is the vineyard manager here, my brother-in-law, we went to a Rhone Rangers rosé event at Sculpterra in 2017, and I was traveling into the country from Australia at the time, so I was only here for a couple months, and we tasted all the rosés in Paso that were at the Rhone Rangers event, and we're like, we need to make a rosé. And so I talked to our senior winemaker, Steve Glossner. He's been our winemaker now for 15 years. And I said, we want to make a rosé. What should we do? He goes, Grenache is nice. And I said, what about Syrah? He's like, can be a bit heavy. And I said, well, it's the oldest planted Syrah in the country, so we should probably use it. But no, so we don't make our own red Syrah, and we don't make a red Grenache. Making a red Grenache on this property right now, since we grow it all for rosé and it sells, it's so hard to crop it down to make it into a serious red varietal. The other thing is that we don't make our Syrah into a red wine for Steinbeck because we still sell all of that to Gary Eberle. And so I managed to come in 2018 and go pick a ton and press it for rosé, and the winemaker says, "What are you doing in my vineyard?" Yeah. So we got that component, and then and also our wine menu hasn't changed at all in like 14 years until Cindy hired me to be assistant winemaker, and now we have like 3 new labels. Oops.
I couldn't have teed this up better, because this is the question that I wanted to ask, not just yourself, but everyone. What is the future here in rosé for your brand? Is it something that you're going to drive into the market, or is it all direct? What does that look like in the marketplace for you, Brian? Let's start with you.
So we are on average 1,300 cases a year, using just 1% of our vineyard, and we don't pick the top fruit either. We pick fruit that makes sense for us, but it's all grown to about the same quality. And so what we're trying to do is showcase our vineyard with our wine and use it to tell our story.
Yeah.
And so we're only making 3, maybe to up to 5 tons of rosé in the future. And that's because that's our general SKU. We have a small tasting room, a small staff, and family members that do tours. And so we can't grow prodigiously. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to showcase the vineyard. And that being said, we have a premium rosé. It's all barrel fermented and native yeast, 100%. And then it's aged until it's ready texturally.
Wow.
With a little bit of attenage, but no malolactic fermentation, at least not yet. It might happen in the future on accident, but yeah. So that's our story.
I love it. And there's, it just dawned on me that there is a little bit of a not similarity, but a comparison or something that is familial between Bonny Doon vineyards and Steinbeck, in that there is some sort of an aircraft phenomenon that continues to come up. I mean, the Bonny Doon, the Cigare, but we also have, Steinbeck with, the B-26 Marauder, the plane crash, right? I mean, this is kind of an iconic part of history in Paso Robles. So can you talk to us just a little bit about that, and then we'll get back on track, I promise.
Sure. So April 11th, 1956, 5 men were given the task of decommissioning a World War II plane, the B-26 Marauder, notoriously unreliable, called the Widowmaker. And from Texas to Mather Air Force Base, which is north of Sacramento, the men were flying the plane. And they were caught in a storm in the mountains by Bakersfield, lost their instruments in a lightning strike, and with low cloud cover and high fog, they weren't able to emergency land. And so they climbed to what they figured was 10,000 feet, headed as close as they could tell due west, and jumped out of the plane when they ran out of fuel. Now, one man actually got sucked back into the tail, and he lost his life. His chute never opened. 4 men jumped out. The first 2, after the man who died, they jumped out with no issues. The last 2 were in the bomb bay, and one man actually got caught in the rigging, and he wasn't going to make it out of the plane. But the other man, right before he jumped out, ran back, got him out, threw him out of the plane, and saved his life. Now, the plane nosedived from 10,000 feet, 600 feet from the front door of the original ranch house here. And so George Steinbeck, Howie's dad, called the high school and said, "Get my son home, a plane just crashed in the front yard." And they got in their old truck and they drove around and rescued the other 4 men, one of which was caught in a tree on the Steinbeck property. Now, so Howie was 17 years old, and he actually found a man who who landed with no parachute. And when we named our wine brand in 2006, this is 50 years later, and we hired someone to find more about the story, and they found 2 surviving members of the plane. It turns out it was the 2 men from the bomb bay.
Wow.
And one man in Boston, one in Utah, and the man in Boston said, "I never got to say thank you. Do you have anyone else's number?" And we said, "Yeah." And he goes, "That's the man who pulled me out of the plane." And so we got to connect all of this history from 1956 to 2006. And then actually 2 weekends ago, one of the children of the man who didn't survive actually came and visited with Howie and went to go visit the site where they found his body for his dad. And so it's just an incredible story, and we just keep making more and more history with it without even trying.
Seriously, I mean, that is incredible. This is like something that is so emotional. I mean, just recently visiting the site, that would have been amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing a piece of history, but also for that amazing memento. Obviously, every time I drink Steinbeck, I'm not only going to remember that story, but I remember how you're cherishing this history and you're creating a space for people to learn about it. But obviously, some incredible wines that are happening here. These are literally bottled memories that are happening. So I'm going to keep my gravity boots on, though. I feel like I'm safer if I stay on the ground and just drink and just hear the stories. I don't know about you, but thanks for sharing. We're coming close to the 5 o'clock hour, and I wanted to make sure that guests that are watching or the audience that is watching has an opportunity to ask some questions. You're more than welcome to chime in before we close. But I wanted to thank everybody for watching. But before we do, I have a couple more questions I wanted to ask. Obviously, I wanted to ask Chuck a quick question about the future of Rosé for his program and kind of where he feels that Rosé and the market's going for him. I know that we have different production sizes, but I was more curious, Chuck, as to where it's headed for you.
Yeah, it's a really coincidence that you're asking that question to me today. We're just now cresting halfway past our production in sales on this wine on the largest production year that we've had. So it's getting I don't feel like the popularity is waning. I know Rosé has kind of gone up and down in popularity, and I think the old 1980s White Zinfandel days, people still have sort of those Vietnam War kind of shell shock smells in their glass, with ice cubes and stuff. But
Sure.
These are different. These are all just completely different wines in those days, and I don't see how this style can ever fall out of favor. So from our perspective, from the four McKahn's perspective, we're going to keep pushing the limit on the production quantity until the market tells us to stop. So I'm looking forward to it. It's a fun wine to make. Like I mentioned, there are just so many different ways to make it, and as you alluded to, there are so many varieties that can go into it. So I'm excited for it. It's the second largest production quantity that we have in our lineup. So it's wild. I never thought it would be that way. But you kind of just go with the flow,
I love it. This is exciting. I know we have all sorts of new demographics and age groups and generations coming up, and it sounds as though it's not waning yet. And Lisa had some great comments. She said the White Zinfandel Miami Vice was her hot August night. So she was barely 21 when it happened. But hey, we've all had the White Zin story. But we do have folks like Randall Grahm to thank for really kind of carving some and pioneering some heavy load there in the industry. And Randall, thank you for doing everything that you've done. But I would love to hear from you as we wrap up. What's the future of Rosé and wine in the next few years?
Those are complicated. Those are one question is relatively straightforward. The other one is really complicated. So I think we're seeing a stratification of the wine business, and the DTC market is very different than the wholesale market. It's almost like two different, like Neanderthal and Homo sapiens, like two different species.
Right.
And in the old days, these two species could coexist and complement each other very, very well. So your DTC, your small amount of DTC fed your wholesale and vice versa. Now they've just utterly diverged. So in other words, to grow something wholesale, the wine needs to be available. It needs to be stylistically consistent. You never want to run out or run out for like 1 nanosecond. Whereas in DTC, you want to create scarcity, whether it's real scarcity or artificial scarcity, and the more esoteric it is, the better. So the two divergent paths, and I don't see how these two paths are going to ever kind of get back together again in our lifetime. And then as far as the future of wine in California has to figure out what it wants to be when it grows up. We've skated, frankly, on the goodwill of customers who are brand loyal. There's no such thing as brand loyalty anymore. That's an antiquated, quaint concept that doesn't really exist quite the way it used to. Millennials are happy to drink Gruner Veltliner from Austria or Chardonnay. So in other words, we're only as good as our last wine, and we have to create a value proposition that's absolutely compelling. And how you do that, it's not obvious in California. Land prices are high, labor costs are high, everything is very expensive. So it really is a perplex. How do you deliver value? Whether on whatever scale, whether it's on a small scale or a large scale, how do you deliver value? And we winemakers should be sleepless. We should not sleep, because there's how can we sleep the sleep of the just? Because there's a lot of angst out there. Anyways, I don't know the answer, but I'm pursuing the question.
No, it's a great conversation that still needs to be had, and the narrative needs to change for sure. I agree with you. I love that you talked about the DTC and the wholesale market kind of, splitting off, and it's definitely, it's not like it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, that's for sure.
In the old days, you made a nice wine, offered good value, had a good story, you were set. Now that's like minimum ticket to entry. That's like you have to achieve that at a minimum, and then maybe you'll succeed.
Yeah.
I think we should, in California, should look at the advantage that we have going for us. What we have going for us is the freedom of action. We can grow things wherever we want, however we want. We need to leverage that to a much greater extent. Just to copy a French style, or even we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage in doing that. We take the advantages that we have.
Well said. I don't think I can add anything more to this conversation, except I love that we're drinking rosé at a great QPR for my wallet. And but honestly, that conversation exists for many of the viewers that are watching too. That if California can just continue to create wine and the freedoms that they have, I think that we'll be in good shape and see a nice transition revolution happening here soon. But I appreciate you guys chiming in. I wanted to thank all our panelists, Chuck, Randall, Brian, and Kale. Thank you guys so much for your engagement and for your wines. What an incredible representation of what rosé can be in California. And I'm proud to be a Californian and drink this. This is like something that is a badge of honor for me to be able to, as a consumer, say, yes, check this out. So I'm not going to be shy in asking my neighbors to come over now that everyone has been vaccinated. I'm excited about sharing that. So thank you guys so much for creating such an amazing product, and cheers to you all, and to your health, and to your families and your coworkers and team. Cheers, you guys. And cheers to the Rhone Rangers, and may you be strong and continue the waving the banner. We appreciate it. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Lamar. Great job. Thank you, panelists. Love the discussion. Just some great ideas and thoughts came out of today. So thank you all. And thank you, everybody who attended and listened. We really appreciate your participation. Please be on the lookout for our next virtual experience in July, where we're going to be focusing on barbecuing and, of course, Rhone wines. So thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.